Good. Okay. Okay, folks, we're going to get started. It's 3 minutes after 7. So good evening. Sego ani buju endio wachaya kwe kwe. As the mayor of the city of Kingston, I offer these words in the spirit of this gathering. Let us bring our good minds and hearts together as one to honor and celebrate these traditional lands as a gathering place of the original peoples and their ancestors who are entrusted to care for Mother Earth since time immemorial. It is with deep humility that we acknowledge and offer our gratitude for their contributions to this community, having respect for all as we share this space now and walk side by side into the future. So with that as an official call to order, it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you back to council chambers. It was 2 years ago that we saw each other on Zoom for the first time. And here we are back in council chambers. I was going to say this is their first in-person meeting in 2 years, but actually, to be more accurate, this would be the first ever hybrid council meeting that we have ever had. And I do want to recognize staff in the clerk's office and our IS&T department that have worked tirelessly over the last number of weeks to put together the technology to make this work. If you've participated in any hybrid meetings, you know that they can be a little bit challenging to work with, but I think we have a great setup here. Not to say that there might be some further changes as we go forward, but right now we do have 11 members of council here in chambers, and then we have 2 members of council and most staff and members of the public online. And of course, that mix will likely change in the weeks and months to come. So with that, Madam Deputy Clerk, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Mayor Patterson, we have quorum. At this time, I would also like to confirm, as you previously mentioned, all members of council are present tonight. Joining us from staff, Lanny Hurdle, Chief Administrative Officer, Paige Agnew, Commissioner of Community Services, Neil Carbone, Commissioner of Corporate Services, Peter Hugenboss, Commissioner of Business, Environment and Projects, Brad Joyce, Commissioner of Transportation and Public Works, Desiree Kennedy, CFO and City Treasurer, John Bolignone, City Clerk, Jeff Bumstead, Chief Information Officer, Jennifer Campbell, Director Heritage Services, Lisa Capener-Hunt, Director Building and Enforcement, Craig Desjardins, Director Strategy, Innovation and Partnerships, Lana Folds, Director Financial Services, Brent Fowler, Director Corporate Assets Management and Fleet, Paul McClatchy, Environment Director, Jenna Morley, Director Legal Services and City Solicitor, Karen Santucci, Director Public Works and Solid Waste, Muhammad Hassan, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Manager, Janet James, Deputy City Clerk, excuse me, Heather Scranage, Manager Housing and Childcare, Jeffrey Walker, Manager Taxation and Revenue, Joanne Boris, Housing Program Administrator, Elizabeth Fawcett and Ian Sullivan are providing meeting host services tonight, and Chris Saverin is providing technical support. We do also have a number of delegations. Candace Christmas is delegation number 1, delegation 2, Gilles Charette and Carol Ravnas, and delegation 3, Megan O'Leary and Justine McIsaac. And we have one briefing from Laura Turner. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we were meeting in committee of the whole closed meeting, and we discussed several items. One with respect to collective bargaining with IATSE Local 471, also parkland acquisition and the CAO performance review. So I will ask for a motion to rise without reporting, please.
Moved by Councillor Boehm, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff, that council rise from the committee of the whole closed meeting without reporting.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, next we have the approval of the addeds. We have 4 sets of addeds that we'll approve together. We have an addition of 3 delegations. We have a couple of additional reports with respect to the integrated care hub. We have an item of miscellaneous business and some communications. Can I have a mover and a seconder for those addeds, please? Moved by Councillor Sanik, seconded by Councillor Neal. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, with council's permission, in addition to amending our agenda, which also includes the withdrawal of new motion 1, I would also like, with council's consent, to bump up report number 36 from the Citizens Remuneration Committee until right after the briefing. Those members of the committee are all here and joining us, but we thought that if we did the briefing and then discuss the report, then they would be available for further questions. So if everyone's nodding in my direction, that's okay? Okay, thank you. Are there any disclosures of potential pecuniary interest? Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, this is actually for a previous meeting, and this is my first opportunity to disclose it, as I was not able to attend that meeting for personal reasons. So I, Ryan Bowman of the Corporation of the City of Kingston, declare my pecuniary interest in the matter of Clause 6, Report number 29. As an employee of Utilities Kingston, it may be perceived that I have a conflict with Agenda Item 6, Report 29 of the previous meeting, insofar as it relates to Utilities Kingston. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other disclosures of potential pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. We have no presentations this evening, but we do have 3 delegations. So first, I will invite Candace Christmas to appear before council to speak to Clause 5 of report number 32 from the CAO with respect to the Integrated Care Hub next steps. And just a reminder to all of our delegations this evening that you have 5 minutes to speak, and then I will open up the floor to members of council. So with that, Ms. Christmas, welcome. We see you here on the screen, and I will hand the floor over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the time this evening. I sent in some slides, but I'm not sure if you're going to get to those. I just wanted to start out by saying, first and foremost, it's amazing news that the Ontario Ministry of Health has decided to fund the Integrated Care Hub and that the doors will stay open. I was there on the 25th of February in the snowstorm with many, many people who have been wonderful advocates for this. But I wanted to highlight in my presentation that the MOH funding is not the only thing that is going to ensure that the ICH stays successful. As the author of the needs assessment for the ICH that was published last year, we see that the clientele that uses the Integrated Care Hub really suffer from what we call a tri-diagnosis. Substance use is the foundation in terms of the clientele that is there. They're there because they have in the past not been able to access typical shelter services because of their substance use. But we also came to know that 90% of them have multiple mental health diagnoses, as well as 90% of them also suffer from have suffered from multiple head injuries, which puts in question their cognitive ability. So all of these things factor into the fact that they have chronic pain and trauma, behavioral and mood disorders, as well as are at constant risk of overdose because of the poison supply. Now, the thing that is really that has made the hub successful is that it abides by the concept that the antidote to addiction is connection. And so it's a place of building connection, belonging, and participation. As one patron said, they're looking for a hand up, not a handout. Place-based care is a concept that speaks to the fact that the Integrated Care Hub is a place that they regard as being safe, where they can trust the people to help them, but also that there are multiple services available to them, including nutrition services in terms of stabilizing them through food, wellness services, again, through mental health and addictions, trauma and violence informed care, and harm reduction. So when you look at the complete picture, the Integrated Care Hub, though it has been positioned as a medical and health concern, as well as a public health concern, there's a lot more to building connection, belonging, participation than simply the medical services that they require. So the mantra has been not one more preventable death in terms of the crisis that's occurring. And I would like to put forward to council that the integrated care hub is a community asset. It is not just a place and a collection of services. It's a community asset to the people it serves, but also their loved ones. And as a parent of someone who has lived with someone with serious mental health and addictions issues, while people who use substances may be impossible to live with, they are still loved. And it is incredible to know for those family members and friends and other loved ones that these people have a safe place to go and have had since the inception of the ICH. It's a community unto itself for people who are unable to access regular shelter services because of their addictions issues, for people who need wraparound care because their conditions are very complex, and for people, again, who have nowhere else to turn. This is a harm reduction-based shelter service that saves lives and souls. So again, the mantra, not one more preventable death by overdose. The problem is the complexity of the care that's required is also complex from a governance and accountability perspective. So certainly with my training in health policy and equity at York, multiple services require multiple funding streams, but they also require overarching governance and accountabilities.
30 seconds.
I'm sorry?
30 seconds left.
Okay, so what I would really hope that council can consider is that it is not as simple as allocating the funding. We need the funding from the city as well beyond the MOH funding, but more than anything, we need a robust accountability and governance structure that will bring in the patrons of the integrated care hub, the people who work there, the people who run the organizations that serve them, but also, as we've seen from the recent report, that we also need to incorporate within that integration of governance the neighborhood as well.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ms. Christmas.
I'll
stop you there and I'll open up the floor to council. Are there any questions from members of council? Yes, Councillor Ostroff.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and thanks for the presentation, Candice. The question, I'm just not sure I understood exactly, and I appreciate everything that you've said and are saying. Are you thinking, is there a board of directors now? Is it something that you would like to see council come behind in governance, or what exactly, how do you see that structure coming around you? Is there already a board of directors and leadership in place? I'm sorry, I should know this, but I don't.
No, no, there is not. There's a significant transition that will need to transpire between currently how services are provided and how they may be in future. The reason why I'm suggesting that a governance structure, well, number one, that we need to just recognize the community, the ICH as a community asset, right? It's not a medical facility. It's not going to become a medical facility, even though the majority of the funding is coming from MOH. But really, that if we are going to create or continue to create the programming that has been so successful with respect to integrated care, that we need a broader framework, and that's going to take a little bit of time. But I really think it's worthwhile, and I also think it's particularly worthwhile because, you know, to be honest, this has been a fairly inelegant process, and that's okay. You would know that, and I would know that because I sat on the community or on the neighborhood committee for a while. But really, what we need to do is integrate the different stakeholders who are right down to the clients, right? And what I'm advocating for is creating a model that that really allows for that, so that it's not one organization or other that is sort of dictating what goes down in terms of how this program is going to work. It's a success story, albeit incredibly inelegant, as I said, in many ways. But there's one other model too that we can look to, which is Alpha House in Calgary. They've been at it for 30 years. And I think Kingston's done pretty amazingly well, given the fact that we've realized what we have in 2 years. in the middle of a pandemic. So, so I guess my message to folks is that integrated care is really, really difficult because of ministry silos. And if we can create something that's community-based, it's going to be very, very rich.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. And this, yeah, I guess this is just really picking up on where you left off with the other models. So I'm thinking back to when we got to the point of talking about needing healthcare money to fund this, the integrated care hub. That was because, of course, it started, as you all know, it started to take shape during the pandemic and had emergency funding, but longer term, of course, the city couldn't continue on. So the push to get funding, health funding, was really because we couldn't carry it. But then now it seems that we have this system where there's a sort of what it seems to me what you're saying is that seems to be now a bit perhaps too much of the healthcare system in being involved or proposed, but that a different model of health is what exists at the ICH. And I'm wondering if the one that exists in Calgary that you mentioned is so similar. Are we the only one in Ontario? And is this with the community-based model? If that were to continue, would we be, the only one that is functioning in that way?
100%. We are the only one that's functioning in Ontario that way. Waterloo's been doing some good work, but they're not even close to coming to. So the foundations are, first of all, low barrier. So again, it is not uncommon. Well, it is common. It is prevalent in every community across Canada, for that matter, for people who use substances to experience difficulties accessing a variety of services, in particular, folks who are homeless. Now, when we look at the ICH right now, it's quite interesting to think outside of healthcare providers who come on site to provide medical care, for example. Not a single staff member currently at the ICH has a health or medical designation. So it's interesting how, we position this as a medical crisis and maybe a public health crisis. And I agree it's both, because if we learned anything, I think we learned that the clientele who are at the integrated care hub do have significant medical needs that are not being met. As I mentioned, just the head injury alone from a cognitive perspective, if you think of, for example, the supports that are required to support an adult on the autism spectrum, they're significant. They're expensive. They're wraparound. But certainly in the case of Kingston, we're going to need, other funding streams to make up the difference. The overall budget, as the CAO has articulated in her report, is around 3 million annually currently. So it does leave a bit of a shortfall. My concern is more around ensuring that the different social supports that are required, again, continuing engagement. For example, the hub hires some of its patrons as employees on site. That is also in the recommendations from the consultants, that folks could be hired to do cleanup and so on around the neighborhood. So if we don't have a governance structure that's community-based, my fear is it's very easy to sort of slide into that, sort of medical dyad between, a counselor and their patient, for example, while as, the services that are being providing at the hub are a lot more extensive than that. And as I've articulated, are a community onto themselves. So, and And again, I have to congratulate everyone because it's amazing work considering, you know, how quickly we had to throw this all together because of COVID. Alpha House had the luxury of not having to deal with a pandemic and about 5 years to go through their growing pains. So I think with, again, a little bit more, and I put it before council because, again, regardless of where the funding comes from, this is still, it's a community resource. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Christmas. Are there any other questions from council? Councillor Hutchison.
I want to make sure I heard you properly. Among other things, you're encouraging a change in governance regarding the ICH, which would involve employees, managers, clients, and I believe you said in the neighborhood as well, in line with the Moulton report, which just came out yesterday.
Yes.
So the problem I see with that, and I'll get to the question as fast as possible. The problem I see with that is that Kingston Health Services and the health providers providing this have a responsibility to fulfill the contract and make sure the services are provided. And I'm wondering, in line with what you're saying, if some kind of community in the broad sense, including the groups you suggested, advisory committee or advisory board would fulfill what you're trying to get at, while allowing the health providers to take the responsibility they have to take, and they'll be contractually required.
So the question is an advisory board better than, you're proposing an advisory board and you want to know that?
Well, I want to know if that would be satisfactory to the presenter.
Excellent. Ms. Christmas.
Yes, absolutely. I guess my fundamental point is that this is a broader community effort. It's beyond strictly healthcare. And while the healthcare providers will certainly, they have to serve their masters too, that's going to go into their contracts in terms of what the deliverables are. I think that given all of the work and effort that has gone into the Integrated Care Hub and political skin in the game and everything else over the past 2 years, that an advisory board would be sufficient, but I believe is necessary to just make sure that that we can, from a community-based perspective, including the neighborhood, be able to together create accountabilities that would be satisfactory to all parties. So it would be advisory. I mean, you can't legally mandate it, but I just feel that from the hop, having that type of advisory system would be really, really helpful in terms of not only serving the community well, but also ensuring that the surrounding community, that their needs are heard. And there's no us and them. We're together on it.
Great. Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Okay. Seeing none, Ms. Christmas, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And with that, we'll move to our second delegation this evening. We'll invite Gilles Charette, Executive Director, HIV/AIDS Regional Services, and Carol Ravness, Executive Director of Addiction and Mental Health Services, KFL&A, who will appear before council to speak to clause 5 of report number 32 from the CAO with respect to the Integrated Care Hub next steps. Mr. Charette and Ms. Ravness, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Carol Ravness isn't able to join me tonight. So on behalf of the Integrated Care Hub team, including our community partners, I'd like to begin by expressing my thanks to city staff, Mayor Patterson, Dr. Pecora from KHSC, for the work they've done to secure provincial funding to continue the work of the ICH. In council's report, you will have seen a number of key metrics, so I won't repeat those. But I'm hoping that the story those numbers tell is that since opening in August of 2020, the ICH has met a critical need for part of the population who has sometimes faced barriers accessing the kind of services offered at the ICH. And that in fact, The ICH is an essential part of a suite of supports for individuals who may use substances or experience homelessness or have significant mental health challenges or brain injury. The ICH is not for every person experiencing homelessness or who uses substances, but it's filling an important gap in our system. We're living through an acute drug poisoning crisis. In our region, there have been more drug poisoning deaths than deaths related to COVID-19. But thanks to the heroic efforts of the ICH team, the rate of drug poisoning deaths in KFLA is flattening at a time where rates are climbing dramatically across North America. And because of that, people are being diverted from the emergency room. More importantly, lives are being saved. Having a space like the ICH where people who use substances can be kept safe is crucial. But preventing deaths isn't enough. People need a sense of community, meaning, and purpose in their lives. The ICH's community support program, funded by United Way KFLA, is helping with just that. It's a program where people we serve are paid a fair wage to do meaningful work. It's key to people building their self-worth and seeing what might be possible for their futures. There's no question that in spite of the successes of the ICH, that there have been challenges. I think we all know what they are. It's difficult to feel that the ICH and those we serve are often not welcome neighbors. The ICH team has a great deal of empathy for the challenges experienced by people in the area and wish that the community understood that the team are just trying to help tackle a huge crisis, one that would surely be worse were the ICH not in operation. Stigma around homelessness and substance use continues to be pervasive, compounding shame that keeps people from reaching out for much needed supports. But the greatest challenge is simply that the need is so great that it currently exceeds our capacity to meet it. So we need to continue focusing on increasing supportive housing and other shelter options, in addition to access to safe supply programs. It's essential that to move forward, we begin by reframing our understanding of substance use disorder as just that, a health issue, not a moral failing. The sooner we do this, the sooner we can address the stigma that causes communities to want to turn their heads away from this crisis. In addition, we need to advocate for safe supply programs so that people aren't reliant on the illicit market in order to get the substances they need in order to feel well. I want to thank our partners, KCHC, Street Health Center, AMHS KFLA, Home Base Housing, Providence Care, Lionhearts, United Way KFLA, the City of Kingston, many others, for stepping up during a crucial moment and recognizing, along with us, that each of the people we serve is worthy and deserving of the best care and support we can provide. Finally, I want to thank and acknowledge the courage and dedication of Amanda Rogers, Ashley O'Brien, and Justine McIsaac, whose vision for creating the community of support at the ICH has resulted in a model that communities across Ontario can replicate. Over the last several weeks, we've been working as a small group of partners to envision the next chapter of the ICH, which will build on the strengths of its services to date and will purposely and more deliberately integrate care and service planning for those who receive care at the ICH. These conversations are going well, and in the spirit of the Ontario Health Teams, we're developing a core group of partners who will work collaboratively to deliver care. In order to ensure continuance of service, we envision the ICH operating as it does now for a period of time after April 1st, as we finalize this model and work on a thoughtful way towards the future. This will allow time for the funding particulars and money to flow from the ministry. We would appreciate support of the recommendation that the city continues to be the leaseholder for the ICH building until the end of June to allow for this transition. In conclusion, thanks again to Mayor Patterson and City Council for your ongoing support of this program for our most vulnerable citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Hutchison.
Mr. Charette, thank you for your good work and those are your employees. You heard earlier an appeal for something like a community advisory board with participants from all parties. Do you think that's possible or even desirable? I know you have to be responsible in the end, as with the Kingston Health Center for the contract.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, I think that is desirable and doable. And in fact, it is in line with the model that we have been adopting as the sole funder or funded agency, I should say, for the last 20 months. We have an advisory council of the people we serve. Our staff are involved in a lot of the decisions that are being made. It really is meant to be collaborative. But as we formalize some of the partnerships that are core to the work that we do, because previously it's been sort of a more loose affiliation, and really we're, as the purse holder, there's a lot of influence that is that is centralized with one agency. The ethos of integrated care is really to bring partners along, but even more importantly, engage the people that we serve in the decision-making process. The philosophy in harm reduction and a lot of those roots come from the early days of the HIV/AIDS movement, which of course, HARS is in its genesis a HIV service organization, is nothing without us, nothing about us without us. And so that is in alignment with who we are and what we do, and certainly the idea of an advisory council that includes all of these stakeholders would be important. Obviously, each organization has their own boards that they need to be accountable to, but certainly that's in alignment with the philosophy of care that the ICH seeks to provide.
And just to be clear, that would include the neighborhood.
Yes.
Good. Okay, one follow-up question.
So it's two questions for delegation. I'll interpret that last question as just a clarification of your first question. So you've just one more question. Go ahead.
You're gonna have to explain yourself to this guy. My next question is this: would you be willing to come back to council when the new model is operating in the next, whatever seems reasonable, 3 or 4 or 5 months, and tell us whether you have the budget to do the vast majority of the things that you think are necessary? I'm not saying we're going to give you the money. I'm asking because we need to know that you can be effective.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I can answer the question in advance. I think it's really important for no one to misunderstand just how deep and severe the drug poisoning crisis is. As generous as the province is with their offering, and as generous as the city has been over the last 20 months, again, the need exceeds our capacity to adequately meet it. We are doing everything we can, and we are meeting the basic needs of an enormous number of people. But our concern is still that there are people who are being left behind. And so as I recognize that as far as a program goes, this seems like a lot of money, but the need outpaces our current capacity to meet it. And so we have to look at what our objectives are and what our metrics are and what is reasonable to expect to do with the funding that's being allocated. But certainly happy to come back and report.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions from council? Councilor Sanik.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, thank you very much for your delegation, Mr. Charette. I do realize the importance of the integrated care hub during this drug crisis, that's for sure. My questions are just about the location. With this new agreement and the money from the province, will better security be able to be served to the residents, to the neighborhood?
We currently have our safety and engagement staff who do community work and look after things on property that take place, but as well as some neighborhood concerns. But we are reliant on City of Kingston Police, as well as bylaw, to assist us as well. This really does need to be a collaboration and a partnership. I think what I would do as well is suggest that city staff help to respond to this question.
Thank you. I can ask that when we then go to the report. And my second question is, will there be any consideration with moving the location?
Again, this is a question that I'm happy to put to city staff. I know that there has been some work done to identify potential locations, but again, they would be better able to speak to that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the delegation? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Charette, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
And with that, we'll move to our third and final delegation this evening. I will invite Megan O'Leary and Justine McIsaac from Consumption and Treatment Services, who will appear before council to speak to clause 5, report number 32 from the CAO with respect to the Integrated Care Hub next steps. Ms. O'Leary, Ms. McIsaac, welcome, and you have the floor.
Hi, thanks for having us. We don't have a formal presentation tonight, but really Justine and I, we both work for Kingston Community Health Centers, and Justine runs the consumption treatment services at the ICH and is funded by the Ministry of Health. And so we're thrilled with the funding announcement from last week around the province's commitment to continue funding the vital programming and services delivered by our partners such as HARS and AMHS. And so we're looking forward to continuing to work in partnership to improve integrated care at the site and serving the most marginalized folks in our community. So really we're attending tonight more in support of HARS and our partners for securing ongoing funding. And really if there's any questions that arise tonight specific to CTS programming at the ICH, especially in respect to the evaluation that's being presented. And I'll turn it over to Justine if she has any words as well.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, just moving forward with the new direction of the hub, I think it's very important moving forward, especially in my role as consumption treatment services and navigating an ever-changing drug landscape and how dangerous that is for our community and the people that live in our community. Our partnerships are key, and community buy-in and support is needed moving forward. We will not fix this overdose catastrophe or crisis if we do not start to change the social construct of how we view individuals that use substances and the people that live in this community who use substances and are unhoused are our neighbors as well. So moving forward, this needs to be in the hands of the community, and it should have buy-in from the community, support from as many agencies as possible, in order to navigate this drug catastrophe that we are experiencing due to failed drug policies and so on and so on. It is unfortunately our mess to clean up, and we have to commit to that moving forward if we want to be collectively and collaboratively better as a community. We have a great opportunity to progress. I know a question was asked earlier about is there any models like us? And there's not. And I believe that Kingston as a community has a great opportunity to be on the forefront and the leaders of navigating this drug poisoning catastrophe. So I'm forever grateful for this journey, for the support of City Council, and we hope to continue to move forward in the most progressive way possible, or people will continue to die.
Okay, thank you both very much. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is really about, I visited the Integrated Care Hub. I realized that there's significant issues with regards to providing a safe environment for consumption. But now that the Ministry of Health is funding it, do you envision a component where you'll have a counseling service to help people wean off drugs, maybe have an opportunity to take methadone or Suboxone and actually stop using or get into a treatment plan or a treatment program? Is that something you envision with this new model?
Thank you so much for that question. Actually, a lot of those things are already in place at the moment. Being that Kingston Community Health Centers and Street Health is one of the key partners, we have access to rapid addiction medicine, and we can service people right away. We're able to streamline those services because we're a part of Street Health. So CTS and the hub itself makes an immense amount of referrals to opiate substitution therapy. We have on-site counselors come in, as well as on-site primary care. We just have an opportunity now to expand those programs further. And in order for people to be able to make those changes and progress, they have to stay alive in order to do those things.
Thank you. And through your worship, my second question really relates to the testing of the the substances. I'm wondering how that's going and if you're finding that you've been able to screen out very toxic street drugs that have been laced with fentanyl and other items that would potentially harm someone to cause death. And how's that testing process, that pilot program that we've been working with? Well, I can't, I can't remember the name of the young group from Queens, but I'm just wondering how that has been going and what sort of update you can provide for that.
That's a really good question, but a very complex question at the same time, as I continuously speak on how the drug landscape is ever changing. Realistically, fentanyl is not necessarily what people are testing for anymore. Unfortunately, the illicit market has already been flooded with fentanyl. Now we're looking at substances like bootleg benzodiazepines, like atizolone, that are actually 10 times more powerful than Valium, and actually over prolonged use drastically change the chemical makeup in individuals' brains and impairs their ability to recover. So it's hard. We have access to reports that come out of Toronto, testing, which we know very clearly based on drug trends flow our way. We have applied through Health Canada as well for testing strips in order to provide on site. And the young group from Queens is working on expanding their portfolio for testing. It's a hard thing to keep up with. Like I said, the chemical molecules and makeups of things change all the time, and the cuts and dangerous fillers change all the time. It is very, very, very hard to keep up with.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Okay, thank you both very much for your delegation. At this point, we will move on in our agenda. We have no further delegations, but we do have one briefing this evening. And so it is my pleasure to welcome back to the council horseshoe former councillor Laura Turner, who will be appearing before us to speak to clause 1 of report number 36 from the Citizen Committee to review council remuneration. Ms. Turner, welcome. It's great to see you, and you have the floor.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. It's a pleasure to see everyone. It's my pleasure also to bring this report from the Citizen Remuneration Review Committee. It's just a pleasure to be here, and I will respect the 10-minute time lock. I've pressed both, so I'm ready to go. Okay, so my pleasure to be here to present to council the Citizens Remuneration Final Report. I'd like to introduce the 3 members that are here with me this evening as well. One is Jordan Morelli, Lindsay Foster, and Indira Narain, who sat on the committee with me. Just for some background for the public and some context, the Citizens Committee was mandated by council to examine the role and responsibility of the councillors and mayor to make recommendations regarding remuneration and administrative support for the next council of 2022 and 2026. The members of the committee came from different sectors and provided a wide range of experience. The members were as follows. Myself, which my background was a former city council member from the term of 2014 to 2018. Jordan Morelli was the vice chair, and he represented organized labor at large. Heather Cole represented the education sector. We had Mary Jo Carrera, who represented the business community. John DiPaolo represented the nonprofit sector, and Lindsay Foster represented the community at large. Indira Narain represented the healthcare community. Our committee looked at various comparator community municipalities that were similar in some ways to Kingston, such as size, population, or governance. We looked at Barrie, Brantford, the municipality of Chatham, Kent, Guelph, Sudbury, Thunder Bay, and Peterborough. So there were 7 in total that we looked at. Additionally, our committee created an online survey and interview questions for the current members of City Council. In total, 9 council members completed the 15-question survey online, and 10 council members participated in a 45-minute interview conducted by 3 members of the committee. I'll quickly run through some of the other issues that we considered and how we achieved our conclusions. We looked at average salaries between 7 municipalities in Kingston. We looked at the median salary between 7 municipalities, the average cost per resident of the 7 municipalities in Kingston, and the average cost per councillor, calculating the salary remuneration of the total budget of the municipality for each of the 7 communities. So given the community's observations obtained through the survey and interviews, a modest increase in salary is what we've recommended. It's just a modest one. It's not a huge one, it's just a modest one. The recommendation, as you've probably read in the report, is $129,000 for the mayor and $45,000 for councillors. The CPI, the Consumer Price Index adjustment, will remain in place beginning in 2023. So I want to mention something too, that what we discovered is the average cost per resident for the recommended base salary for the mayor is $1.04. So that's what they pay in their taxes for the mayor, each resident, each taxpayer. And per resident for councillors is 36 cents. So it's not a lot of money in the whole big picture of everything. In addition, we reviewed comparative data for group benefits, insurance, pension, travel allowances, and all the other things that are included in the benefit packages. And the changes for these, we didn't include any changes. We thought they were comparable to other municipalities. However, we're recommending that the additional compensation should be provided to council members serving on the planning committee. The reasons for this are that the complexity of the issues and the frequency of the meetings for council, it's recommended that 4% of their base salary should be added to anyone that sits on the planning committee meetings. Other recommendations that we've suggested are dedicated administrative resource to be provided to council members. This would be in way of 2 employees part-time that would be a full-time equivalent. This person or persons would provide liaisons, social media, policy research, and organizational skills provided to the councillors. At the beginning of 2022 term, council members would be provided with routine and relevant training, and mental health supports would be made to all members of council. We're also suggesting that council direct staff to access and provide private meeting spaces within City Hall and or individual districts for members of council to meet in person with constituents to help them with this. And the council directs staff to provide a report detailing the requirements, including potential costs of conducting the review of full-time versus part-time council member positions and adjusting the boundaries to reflect fewer council members, budget limits, and the city's growing population. The staff be directed to incorporate all the findings of this report as part of the 2022 municipal election public awareness campaign to inform and educate potential candidates and members of the public on the roles, expectations, and realities and demands of City Council. What the committee found through our interviews is that this job is not for the faint of heart, and that some members of council, it can be a 24/7 job. Some councillors have been able to place boundaries on their availability and their timelines, while others have had to endure verbal assaults and trolls on social media. The salary increase is a modest increase. The committee concluded that the compensation paid to councillors doesn't reflect the magnitude of the work undertaken by councillors and members of council. The councillors and mayor are responsible for $500 million in the taxpayers' money, which is a huge responsibility, and it is not taken lightly. The City of Kingston, both population and economy, continue to trend upwards, City Council must continually adapt to these associated demands of such growth. Therefore, we recommend that compensation should reflect this. To conclude, I'd like to thank the Remuneration Review Committee for all their hard work. I'd also like to thank the City Clerk Department, the Financial Services Department, Human Resource Organization Development Department for all their help and invaluable guidance and help in seeing this committee through the process. They were very patient with us. Thank you, everyone. And that's my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Turner. At this point, I will open the floor to any questions from council. Are there any questions? Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. And through you, I just want to quickly thank Chair Turner and all the members of the committee. I definitely, speaking personally, feel like I was heard and my comments were reflected. So thank you for taking that into consideration. I wanted to ask, though, about Guelph. Guelph, in my mind, is in many ways the most comparable city to Kingston in Ontario. And there's a lot of kind of absentee data in the report. And I'm not looking at the committee in error that way, but I'm wondering if there's an explanation why that information wasn't available from Guelph. Maybe someone can help me understand that.
Sure. Well, we could ask the clerk to
Mr. Clerk?
respond to that.
Yes, thank you for that question. That is an excellent question. We did try to secure that information from Guelph. We were unable to do so in time for this report, but definitely on a go-forward basis, we'll incorporate that information in a future report as well.
Fair enough. And as a quick supplemental, I didn't know, perhaps, Mr. Clerk, then if it was because Guelph had recently done a similar process and are looking to move the composition of their council, the changed remuneration and so forth, that could have perhaps factored in. Is that fair?
That's fair, and that is correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good, thanks.
Okay, are there any other questions? Councillor Bohm.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, thanks everybody on the committee for your hard work on this. I know that a lot of hours were put into this, and also Laura Turner, like I know your experience before on council really gave you an insight into just what this job actually entails. So obviously your experience was extremely valuable, and your opinion carried a lot of weight, I'm sure. I guess one thing that I would ask if you could provide a quick answer for is, a lot of the members of the public see this come up, and then I know other council members, and probably yourself included when you were on council, are asked, oh, is it true that council votes on their own pay raise? So I'm wondering if you could just explain a little bit about how the process works so that citizens can understand, and perhaps the media can aid in conveying this information, that really there's a whole process here that we have to follow based on what's laid out by the province. And it includes the arm's length citizen remuneration committee coming back with a recommendation to council. And the only way that any type of raise or any adjustment could be done is for it to be done at council. And also the fact that ultimately we're voting on the next council's increase. This increase doesn't actually affect anybody.
So Councillor Bowman, the only thing I'm going to say is you can't answer your own question.
Sure, fair enough.
So Councillor Bowen,
can you confirm or deny what I said?
You have to allow the committee members to at least answer part of it. So Ms. Turner, is there anything else that you would like to add in response to that question?
Thank you, Councillor Baum. You answered the question very well, but it's true. And if you'd like the clerks to add anything to this, that would be helpful. But you're right, it is a private citizens group. I tried to say that in my my little presentation, but it's all in the report. We look at our job is tasked to review the salaries, and then we present the report to council. It's completely independent of what we've decided and what we've found, and then it's presented to council, and then you review it and you decide on this. But I think the clerk could probably explain this very well and very eloquently.
Thank you. Yes, if the clerk would like to comment on who actually gets the pay raise, it's not this council, I believe. But if the clerk could provide, again, I'm answering my own question, sorry. But if the clerk could provide some comments in context of that, so that the public can truly understand. Because I know once this goes out in the media, regardless of the result, there'll be further questions on it.
Thank you for that question. I've heard the answer a couple of times, but I'll just reaffirm. what's misstated, yeah, the remuneration is for the next term of council. The people that were appointed to this committee, very diverse and inclusive group, are basically the community, and the community is making the recommendation to council, and council is then either going to approve or not approve the recommendation. It does not impact remuneration for this current term of council. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that insight. And once again, thanks to the committee for, I know what would have been countless hours of work. And I know I took up some of those hours as well on my interview, a little bit more than I was allotted, but I appreciate all the work on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Chappelle?
Through your chair, I'd like to thank the committee for the work. I certainly enjoyed my interview with them. I was grilled heavily and peppered with many questions. So it was a fun experience. I just wanted to one of the items that I had recommended was reducing the salary of the members of council because it's part-time. And I was just wondering how we ended up with an increase. And secondary to that is if we had taken a portion of that salary of the counselor and parked it into like an envelope for publication and communication instead of remuneration. That was another item that I had floated, and I was just wondering what happened to that concept. So basically, rather than hiring city staff, you would contract out to like a Loyalist college student or somebody along that line.
Ms. Turner.
Thank you, Councillor Chappelle, for your question. It's a very good question. And you did have some very good suggestions when we interviewed you. We did consider that in the report of your suggestion, but we found that difficult to administer as a comprehensive suggestion across many councillors of taking that snippet of money and allocating it to different people. So that was difficult. It was an interesting suggestion, support staff. But I guess you could do that yourself. You could allocate your own support staff. But this way, it's sort of a start to getting support staff for council, to get them to have someone within the system that can navigate their way through City Hall and to help them learn their way, especially for new councillors that are coming on board, to learn their way through the City Hall and how it works and get help within City Hall versus help within your own home office. So those were good, but it was a good suggestion. But at this stage of the game, maybe that's something for the next City Council to review and request.
And I guess just as a supplemental to that, because I did ask the question about lowering the salary. Was I the only councillor that proposed lowering the salary for city councillors in our interviews?
That's a good question. Yes, I believe you were the only one asking to lower the salary for the councillors. Yes, you were.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, Ms. Turner, thank you very much. And with that, just if you and the committee members can stay online, just in case there are any further questions. Right now, we are going to deal with your report. So at this point, I will ask for report number 36 from the Citizens Committee to review council remuneration.
Moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Holland, that report number 36 from the Citizen Committee to review council remuneration be received and adopted.
Okay, so there is the one clause, council remuneration. Is there any discussion, comments? Councillor Kiley?
Thank you. And through you, I might be repetitious here, but I just wanted to make the point about Guelph because it was missing. And again, that's just an unfortunate anomaly due to what was happening in Guelph. And for those who haven't, I encourage them to take a look at Watson and Bain's report on the changing composition of Guelph Council, because again, there's so many comparators that I think that we could use here. And the result was they decided to move from 12 councillors, which we have now, to 8, from part-time to full-time. And so I think the recommendation in this report that asked for staff to bring the outline of what a report could look like for something perhaps similar in Kingston is really wise and forward-looking. And I hope that we can support the entirety of this report and its recommendations, especially including that clause. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Neal.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Laura, for leading the way and the committee. That's an excellent report. A couple of things that I think are really noteworthy and very positive is recognizing that people on the planning committee have a very, very large job to do. I've been on the planning committee for the last 4 years, and I put more time and get more reading regarding planning than I do for council. And so it's a very modest increase, but it's a positive recognition that that people on planning do a lot of work. And in fact, that's why it was the only committee for much of this term of council that only had 5 members of the committee when we should have had 6. And so I think it's very positive that that's a recognition. Your report overall, I think, was very thorough, and I'm not going to repeat what we've already heard several times, but in fact, that this is an arm's length community group that are making the recommendation. And I really, really appreciate that. There's one very minor thing, and I'm going to separate the this when we come to the final vote. I've traditionally always voted against and will vote against the idea of a cost of living allowance stipend. I know it's a really minor thing, but that makes council the only group within City Hall that gets any kind of cost of living recognition. And for that reason, I'll be voting against that very minor thing. And it isn't a very costly thing, but I think it is something that we should acknowledge. If no employee in the city is afforded that, I'm not sure, I don't understand why council would be. And that's just a personal observation. I've voted against it before and been scolded for doing that. And but I'll be voting against that tonight. But everything else in your report, I think, is excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hill.
Thank you. I also want to thank the work of the committee, and I think one of the more I mean, the compensation parts of it, you know, that's nice. I think the bigger consideration here is that it pushes us, I think, to contemplate what we want the council to look like. If we're going to, and of course, rumors are starting to float now about who is running and who isn't running again. And I suspect that one of the significant influences in terms of people not running again is that the time commitment, especially if they're working and if they have young families and all those other sorts of things that complicate lives. And if we're going to encourage more visible minorities to be part of this council, if we're going to encourage more women to be part of the council, which is definitely something we would like to see. If we want to see more young people be represented on council, then I think it's really critical that we create a compensation process that not only allows them to participate, but encourages them to be a part of this. And so I think, you know, for my own part, I'm retired. And so this is doable work for me. I can tell you that if I was still a high school principal, I don't think I could incorporate all this work on top of my daily job, and especially, you know, when my kids were home. So I don't think you want to see a council made up of just old people like me. I think you want to see a pretty diverse council, and I think that this is a step in the right direction for that. Just as an aside, though, I will be happy to propose a motion that Councillor Chappelle get paid less than the rest of us. I'm just kidding. Thank you. But thank you again to the committee for their great work.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion? Okay, so as per Councillor Neal's request, we will do two votes. First, we will vote on the entirety of the recommendation except for the second component of the first paragraph that says with annual consumer price index adjustments starting as of January 1st, 2023. Okay, so everything other than that first, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries by a vote of 12-1. Councillor Chappelle opposed. And then now on the remaining piece from paragraph 1. Yes, Councillor Hutchison.
Sorry, I think I misunderstood that. You said we were busy approving everything but the first?
Yeah, so Councillor
Okay.
Neal asked for a separation
Okay.
so that he could,
I'm sorry, but I didn't think that's what I was voting for.
okay,
I wanted to separate out the third and the seventh paragraph.
okay. So we'll redo the votes. So we will do 3 votes. The first vote, just give me a minute. Okay, so the first vote, well, we'll do it the other way around because this will make it a little bit simpler. So the first vote will be on the 3rd and 7th paragraphs only. Everyone follow what those are? So the 3rd paragraph, that effective November 15th, 2022, members of council serve on the planning committee, receive remuneration equal to the amount of 4% of their base salary remuneration upon completion of their annual term serving on the committee. And then paragraph 7, the council directs staff to provide a report detailing the requirements, including potential costs of conducting review of full-time versus part-time council member positions and adjusting ward boundaries to reflect fewer council members, budget limits, and the city's growing population. Okay, well, first a vote on paragraph 3 and 7. All those in, I'm sorry, Councillor Sanik?
Your worship, can we do 3 separate and 7 separate?
Sure. Okay, so first to vote on paragraph 3. Paragraph 3, remuneration planning committee.
I want to speak to 3.
Okay, so Councillor Hutchison, so
Okay.
you have to, so the way this works is you only speak once to the overall clause. So we don't do separate rounds for each of the individual paragraphs. So because we haven't started the voting, we'll just continue the discussion until everybody's completed. So you have 5 minutes to speak to this or any of the other paragraphs.
Sure. Okay, so that's for both 5 minutes? Okay. So be quick. I don't think the planning committee members deserve a 4% of base salary remuneration. It's a planning committee like any other. There is more work, so you adjust what you do on the other committees to make it fit. And I can't see this. I've had a lot of work when we did ARC, when we were doing the parks, as CEO can attest. She did a great deal herself when she was commissioner then. But it never occurred to me to ask for more money than my fellow councillors. You choose what you're going to do. And I think you should, and what really bothers me about it is it sets up 2 tiers of councillors, ones that receive extra money and those who don't. And that doesn't go well over time. We had a board of control, remember, once upon a time, and that's why it failed. And so I really ask council to consider that. Councillor Neal is quite correct. He can spend all the time he says, and I'm sure he does. And the weeks when some of us are on planning and council is, just a wipeout. But I don't think we should set up that kind of differentiation. The 7th one bothers me. It's the detailing requirements, including potential costs of conducting a review of full-time versus part-time council member positions. I don't remember anybody asking for that. But I'm at a question to the clerk. It says adjusting ward boundaries. Are you not charged with doing that anyway? We've done it at least once since I've been on council.
Mr. Clerk.
Thank you for the question. You're correct. We did do a ward boundary review, which we led through the clerk's department.
Relative to the changing demographics. So that's going to take
correct.
place anyway.
Yeah.
All right. So we can just ignore that part of that paragraph 7. The problem with this is the whole question of full-time versus part-time has a long history, over 100 years. Okay. And what it is the people that are able to run for the full-time positions are not most of the population. Anybody with wages who has to be at work to earn their money, and people like in a situation like Councillor Hill tend to be excluded because they don't control not just money, which is part of the problem, but they don't control their own time. They have to be at work. So they're not available to be there full time. That's one of the reasons why part-time works better. Now, where you see it in Ontario tends to be the really large places like Toronto, Hamilton, Ottawa. And Councillor Kiley told me that Guelph had done this. They can do what they like. That doesn't make them right, okay? And so I cannot in good conscience vote for this because it's less democratic. Fewer people can afford to run and fewer people have the time to run. And we went through this 8 years ago, whenever the last time we did this. And it's very obvious that this is the effect. So I'm going to move that we delete that paragraph. Because the only important part is the demographics, and that's happening anyway.
So Councillor Hutchison, rather than moving to delete the paragraph, we've already separated it, so you can simply vote against it. You've encouraged council to vote against it. If council votes against it, it's deleted.
Okay, separate, you're correct. Okay, that's another way of doing it, sure, fair enough. So I encourage people to vote against this particular paragraph. Other parts of this are fine. And maybe this is a bit more idiocentric, but to vote against paragraph 3 as well, because I don't think the mid to long-term effects of that are going to be good. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, would you take the chair?
I take the chair and I recognize you.
Thank you. Well, I would just like to point out that paragraph 7 isn't even asking for a study. It's asking for staff to report back to council with the costs and requirements of what a study on potentially moving from full-time to part-time would look like. I just want council to understand that we're not making any decisions here. We're not even commissioning a report. We're just simply asking staff for more information. And the fact is that there are councillors around this table that have expressed to me that they do think that this is a question worth exploring. Regardless, we may all have strong feelings about one way or the other, but this is just to take an additional step of potentially get more information. So I think number one, first of all, I think in recognition of the fact that this is coming from our own citizen committee, that they have recommended this, I think that that should be supported just in recognition of that. Ultimately, once we get to that stage, council can decide whether we want to move further on it or not. So nobody's staking any positions on this. The other piece is for paragraph 3, I'm happy to support it simply because I have seen over the years that we have a hard time getting councillors to volunteer to be on planning committee. If we didn't have this problem, if we always had 6 or more councillors wanting to be on planning committee, then you know what? I probably would say, no, this additional piece isn't enough. But sometimes when there is that additional work that you're really volunteering for, this is something that can encourage councillors to put their name forward. Last term, we did this for the deputy mayor role because there's a lot of additional work that comes with being the deputy mayor. And we were having a hard time attracting councillors that wanted to have that role. It's a small increase, but I think it's a recognition of the fact. So I'm happy to support both paragraph 3 and 7. Thank you.
Thank you. I return the chair.
Okay. So let me just go back to my list. So Councillor Kiley, Councillor Neal, Councillor Hill, Councillor Hutchison, and myself have spoken to clause 1. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak that has not already spoken? Councillor Sack.
Thank you, Your Worship. I support what Councillor Hutchison has said, and I appreciate the gesture for that 4% increase to the to the remuneration committee. That's really nice. I appreciate that because I do know planning committee is a lot of work, but this is what we signed up for as being a councillor, and there's a way to balance all that extra work on planning committee by maybe then not being on as many other committees. So if you got planning committee, maybe you only want to be on one other standing committee and some smaller committees to make up for the time. It's everybody's preference. And we have had some planning committee meetings that, yes, I think our record was before COVID, we went until 1:30 in the morning, one morning that started at 6 o'clock, 1:30 in the morning, right back in 2019. So we, definitely did our money's worth that night. But there have been some planning committee meetings where we've, ended it in 1 hour or even half an hour. It all depends what planning application is on the agenda. And this is what we signed up for. And so I totally appreciate the gesture of that extra 4%. But, I just want equality and there's a way to balance. And so I won't be supporting paragraph 3. For paragraph 7, I know there's, like 2 sides to the story, and we kind of had that debate over the years too of counselor at large versus district counselor. This is now full-time versus part-time. And I know we're not arguing it out tonight, but I think it'd be really hard to, quit your full-time job just for a 4-year gig. So if you're retired or close to retirement, you can take that risk. But when you're in your late 20s, you're in your 30s, you need job security. And to quit whatever job you had up until the age of 32 and just to try it for 4 years where you could be turfed after that 4-year term too. I don't want to put anybody in that position unless you're, in the GTA where you're making $110,000, right? Those full-time counselors in Brampton, in Toronto, in Markham, they're making $110,000. They have staff. Maybe for that, it's worth that risk. But for our job here in, I was going to say little Kingston, but in, mid-sized city Kingston, I just don't think it's worth the risk. And I'm happy being, part-time counselors here in Kingston forever. So I won't be supporting paragraph 7. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Stroud, then Councillor Bohm, and then Deputy Mayor Holland. Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. So to start with, let's first just acknowledge what both those clauses are attempting to address, and that is workload and compensation, right, in general terms. We've heard about this equality or equity between councillors as a theme, and I think that's probably a principle that's higher, more important than adequate compensation would be for council members to be all paid the same. I think then, but we're already paying deputy mayor extra, so we've already started the horse down that lane. But let's compare that. So deputy mayor, if you do it, it's 2 months at a time, $250 a month, that's $500. Probably no more than once a year because you don't tend to do it more than once a year. I know that I've done it 6 times in 6 years. So that's probably about how often it comes along. So that's $500 extra for that year. If you're on planning committee, on the other hand, you get 4% of a $45,000 salary, that's $1,800, right? So that's more than 7 times the monthly amount or 3.5 times the total if you do it for 2 months of being deputy mayor. So it's quite a bit more money than being deputy mayor. That's where you start getting into this inequality thing. If it was just a small, like the deputy mayor thing is, it's not the money that makes you do it. It's not enough money to motivate you that way. With planning, I think it might be. So that's where you start getting into, well, how much work is planning committee? And what about the other committees? Heritage committee, arts advisory, you go along, nominations can be hours and hours, right? So then we haven't quantified those other committees and we're just asking for problems because people are going to say, well, okay, fine. Planning committee is great because now I get paid for it. But nominations, I'm not getting paid extra, so I'm not going to do nominations anymore. I can see that happening. We've had problems filling committee appointments in the past, as His Worship has said. So I really think, what we ought to do with this is quantify the workload before we approve an increase. And if it's going to be equitable, it has to be based on all the committees that you're on, because some people are on 5, 6, 7 committees and some people are on 2, right? That's also not equitable. So I don't think it's very wise to just add it, despite the fact that I agree with what Councillor Neal said about planning committee. It is the one that stands out as the heaviest workload consistently because it's twice a month. I think it probably is at the top if we quantify it, but we haven't done so yet. So we need to quantify it, we need to count it up. I don't know how we do that because this committee that reported here did not have the time to count up all the committee work, but maybe we could find a way to do that through staff and come back to this question in the future with compensation for committee work as a general recommendation, rather than just throwing all of it at the planning committee members. I think it does create an imbalance. And so I think I will agree with Councillors Hutchison and Osanek on that one. On the full-time, part-time one, I'm going to hear what the rest of you have to say about that. And for the rest of the recommendations, I am in favor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, I'm going to agree with some of what was said by former members of council and previous members of council this evening. As far as the difference in pay for the planning committee, I understand the thought behind that. I also struggle with it as well, though, simply because, you know, we can't quantify everybody's workload, and we do start to kind of create winners and losers. And I would hate to fathom that somebody, you know, would potentially be on planning, and then you could start to say, well, there's 6 members on planning and all getting an extra, whatever, it works out to $1,800 a month to be on planning. But 4 of those members on planning attend the majority of the meetings and do the majority of the work, but still get this paid the same as the other 2 members who maybe don't make as many meetings. So, I mean, in my 8th year on council, I know that based on personal circumstances and everything, there's been some years where I don't even know, I think the most committees I was on at one point was 11, which was just unsustainable. And then there's been other years where I've been on fewer. So I think the workload does vary based on everybody's personal situation, what you're able to do. But, you know, we could be setting ourselves up to a point where 3 members on planning feel that they made the most meetings and the other 3 made maybe half, but everybody got paid the same amount for being simply just a member of that committee. I don't think we really want to go down that road. To Councillor Stroud's point, you know, there's been, I don't know how we quantify it or make it fair. I guess in a sense, I probably would have preferred maybe an additional increase for all members of council, seeing as we typically rotate through the committees over our full term of 4 years. I do understand planning can be quite heavy. I know at other times admin policies, we've had one thing that took, you know, multiple years to go through and was a ton of different work, and we were constantly, so it does vary. I'm not sure that just picking one committee out of the standing committees and then some of the other committees, I don't know how you would do that and apply it fairly without doing some real big data crunching. So I share Councillor Stroud's concerns and comments there. And as far as the full-time versus part-time, I think it's almost every council member or former council member that I've ever spoken to has said it's part-time pay for a full-time job. And that's kind of, everybody chuckles when they say that, but that's also something where I think we have to take into account that what that question is asking in that paragraph is simply to just have a look at what this would look like. Nobody's making a decision tonight. It's just, let's get more information. And I agree. Saying that, you know, somebody in their 20s or 30s may not want a contract position for 4 years if it was full pay. Many people in their 20s and 30s right now are on 2 or 3 year contract positions with no guarantee of a job at the end of it. So, I mean, like, I don't think that actually creates a barrier to running for this position. And this position gives you so much knowledge and so much insight that it could actually lead to further positions, even if you weren't successful in being elected again. So I do think that for a lot of people, the fact that this doesn't have a full-time wage is actually more of a barrier, because most people doing this right now are holding down another job. And I believe it was Councillor Hill earlier that said that can become quite unsustainable. I mean, how many councillors have we lost over the years, not because of an unwillingness to do the role that had already gained 4 or 5 years experience doing it, but simply because they couldn't manage it with their other position to afford having a family and living their own life. So, I mean, I think that those are things that need to be weighed in this decision. Kingston as a municipality, I think we know we punch above our weight in so many ways, but there's also one other thing is we also have problems that are atypical for a municipality our size, such as, the heritage buildings that we have to manage, all those other things, all these things that are big city problems, but we're a medium-sized city and we're dealing with a lot of these with, constrained resources, not the same tax base as a lot of those other cities. So for a city our size, we have a lot of work that has to be done by what's right now a part-time council. And I know that many of us are putting in full-time hours. As far as the wage increase, if you're going to pay more for people to be on planning, I mean, we need to look at other things like engagement of counselors. I can tell you that I spend, I'm sure most other people do, tons of my time, evenings and weekends, just replying to customers or residents or people looking for simple things from the city. And then other things simply as, I'm sure a lot of people have heard over the last week, do you vote on your own raise? How does that all work? And then, so you're just spending time constantly. So, I mean, how do we quantify that time as well? I know it was brought up to the committee. So
30 seconds.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. And so, I mean, in voting on all these things, I think it's great that we're asking for more information. I don't feel that I can support the 4% extra for planning. And we need to be cognizant of the fact that once we start doing that for one committee, and what if I put in 20 extra hours a week just to talk with my constituency? Is that worthy of more? So I think we have to be careful, and any increase needs to be balanced across the full of council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Holland.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. So I'm speaking mostly to the third paragraph as well with regards to the committee remuneration. And I started out thinking that I would be in support of this and recognize, having only been on planning for 1 year in particular, because it was not sustainable, given that I had to work a few other jobs. It just wasn't a committee I could commit to. So at first, I thought that I would be supporting that increase, and I'm still interested in that and recognize the need for that. But then hearing not so much the solidarity argument or the fairness argument, which I have a lot of appreciation for what previous councillors have said along those lines of making it not creating a level of unfairness. But I think we have to recognize that it's sort of that, to Councillor Osenek's point, when there is a committee that councillors recognize take up that much time, and then they have to try to balance by not taking on other committees. What ends up happening is that we have other councillors taking on more committees because the councillor made that adjustment. So I'm now actually more interested in something like, I guess the question really is, and I don't know if we can ask this to the committee, or to staff, but other models exist where there's a sort of base salary and then each committee has a certain remuneration attached to it, I believe. I don't know if it's the school board here locally that does it, but were other models like that a part of the report or the research?
Ms. Turner or Mr. Clerk, any comments on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you for that question. That particular type of modeling wasn't something that the committee was exercising as part of their review. The information came through with respect to surveys as well as input that was provided from the community at large. And one way to recognize the additional work that came out of the discussions with the committee was to provide some nominal amount of monies for those that serve on the planning committee. It wasn't a scientific research to get that point.
Got it. So then another question through you, Mr. Mayor. Is it possible would staff be able to bring any information like that back in the future? I mean, I suppose, or would it require an amendment to this recommendation?
Through Mr. Mayor, staff are always willing to provide additional information to council to make informed decisions. This is a recommendation from the community to this council, so it needs to be dealt with one way or the other. We are always, like I said, willing to provide any and all information in the future.
Okay, great. I think that would be interesting because I think yeah, as was mentioned, planning committee, I mean, the issue is we have a current problem that needs to be addressed in terms of getting people to be motivated to be on certain committees. And that's what this recognizes. So I'm still leaning in favor of supporting it just to make sure that we can address that situation, because it's very important that that work happens and that committee has a full complement. But I really also would like to see more information on how we could start to have a different model of remuneration in the future, maybe that addressed some of the committee concerns that others have mentioned. So I think I'm voting in favor of it. Overall, thank you to the committee and like the rest of the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Osterhoff.
Sorry, Mayor Patterson. Thank you. Yeah, I do want to thank the committee as well, Laura and your team, everyone there. I don't have all the names here, but I'm really impressed and really grateful for all the hard work. And I too enjoyed the interview very much. And I can really hear us all speak. I mean, we could all write a book. I could after these years on council, and the incredible amount of work and the amount of respect that I have for all of my colleagues, because it is a lot of work. So, but it's, the reward is the work and the people. And but I think that a lot of this recommendations are good, and I really appreciated Councillor Hutchison's thoughts on. I did not know. I can see where it's been 100 years of discussion as we have deliberated over decades and a century, really, this great city and the commitment of councillors over so many years. And I do see the risk, and I'm happy to vote against it. We don't want to have a less democratic situation. Moving to full-time, I have thought about that, because I know we're all going to say it is full-time, and only because I'm in a unique spot for myself could I give it the dedication that I do. And I'm grateful that I can, and I see it in all of us. But to have a full-time job and this responsibility as counselor is almost impossible, I think. But so I think it's important that we balance the work, like we said, that it doesn't become full-time in a sense. And so part-time is something I would think that would be better for the people of Kingston, and allowing others to consider it. So the extra remuneration, I really appreciate Councillor Holland's thing. I think it needs to be reviewed a bit more. I do empathize and sympathize with the planning committee, so I could support it and then look at the others. But I know it's true, we balance our time in every way, and so if we're not on there, we give considerable time to so many other committees. So I'm going to struggle with number 3 for a while, but I appreciate the work going on, and I just wanted to speak to it. Thank you, Mayor Patterson.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other speakers, then we will move to the votes. So we will do 4 votes. First, we will vote on clause 3. That is with respect to the additional compensation for planning committee. Okay, all those in favor? 5, opposed? 8. So that loses. And it's myself, Councillor Neal, Councillor Kiley, Councillor Hill. No.
Osterhoff.
Oh, you're opposed. Okay, sorry. Who was in favor? Councillor Neal, Councillor Holland, Councillor Hill, myself, Councillor Osterhoff. Okay, thank you. Just so everyone knows who is in the minority on that. Okay, next we will do a vote on clause 7. All those in favor? Oh yes, clause 7 is asking staff to report back with costs to do a report to look at potentially moving from short part-time to full-time counselors. Okay. All those in favor? 5 opposed? 8. So that also loses. If you voted in favor, can you just put your hands up again? If you're in favor, just in minority. So Councillor Kiley, Counselor Hill, Counselor Chappelle, Counselor Bohm, and myself opposed. But it's just, I'm just trying to let people know who was in the minority. That's all. We don't have the recorded voting system back, so. Okay, next we're going to vote on the second part of the first clause only, which says with annual consumer price index adjustments starting as of January 1st, 2023. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that carries by a vote of 11-2. Councillor Neal and Councillor Chappelle opposed. Okay, and then now we will call the vote on the balance of the recommendation. So that's everything other than paragraphs 3 and paragraph 7, and then the first part of paragraph 1. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries by a vote of 12-1. Councillor Chappelle opposed. Okay, thank you again to the Citizen Committee for all your work on that. And with that, we will continue on in our agenda. So we will now move. We have no further briefings. Are there any petitions to present? Okay, seeing none, we have no motions of congratulation, recognition, sympathy, condolences, and speedy recovery. We have no deferred motions. So we will move to reports. First up, we have report number 31 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Stroud, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that report number 31 from the Chief Administrative Officer, consent, be received and adopted.
Okay, we need to separate clause 1 for a couple of council volunteers. Are there any other separations? Okay, so first then we will deal with clause 1. I'm sorry, Councillor Kyla.
Sorry, point of order. I'm just trying to follow here on the agenda. We're on 31 or 32?
31.
Okay, apologies. No.
No, it's okay. So clause 1, I'm looking for a volunteer, a counselor to be part of the Kingston Arts Fund operating grants jury, and then a counselor to participate in the Kingston Arts Fund project grants jury. Do I have a volunteer, please, for either of those? Do we need to attach 4%? Do we have any volunteers? Councillor Neal, do you have as the first volunteer, do you have a preference between the operating grants and the project grants?
Probably project grants.
Project grants. Okay. Do I have a volunteer for the operating grants? So the operating grants meeting is May 17th from 9 to 4. That's fine. May 17th is a Tuesday. Okay, do I have a volunteer? Councillor Neal?
I can't volunteer for both, but what I can do is I've always been involved with one or the other. It's always fallen on, as if I recall, it's always been on a Saturday before. So you give up one weekend day, and it's a really interesting process. And it'd be a shame if we didn't.
For sure. So Councillor Neal, can I just put a pause? So Councillor Stroud, you said that you'd be willing to volunteer if it wasn't on a Tuesday of a council meeting. If we were to switch, would you volunteer for the project grant committee?
Yeah, I could do project grants on the 19th. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, I believe I was project grant.
I know. Would you be willing to switch? If not, then that's fine. I mean,
it doesn't matter to me. I can.
Because you said you'd be willing to do either.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
In a weak moment.
Okay. You can withdraw if you don't want to. It's okay. All right. So what we have then is for clause 1, we'll have Councillor Neal appointed to the operating grants jury and Councillor Stroud appointed to the project grants jury. Okay, so we will call the vote on clause 1. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, next we'll call we'll do the vote for clauses 2, 3, and 4. Clause 2 is report request for temporary noise exemption, Leon Center Music Concert. Clause 3, Kingston Penitentiary 2022 lease revision. And clause 4, family physician recruitment incentive program amendment.
Your worship, can I split out number 4? I'd like to be consistent with my voting on that one.
Okay, so what we will do is we will just do a vote on clause 2 and clause 3. Okay, all those in favor? Okay, I'm not getting everybody. So let's do the vote. This is on clause 2 and 3. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Now clause 4, family physician recruitment incentive program amendment. Councillor Chappelle.
Yes, I went back and your worship, I went back and I reread the report on this $250,000 for a period of 8 years. And I'm still not satisfied on how we selected the service partner to help with the recruitment. So I'll have to be consistent with my previous voting record of voting against that sole source approach to having a service partner. So I'll be voting against this.
Okay, thank you. So we'll call the vote then on clause 4. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries by a vote of 12-1. Councillor Chappelle opposed. Okay, on to report number 32 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Osterhoff, seconded by Councillor Hill, that report number 32 from the Chief Administrative Officer recommend be received and adopted clause by clause.
Okay, our first clause, use of optical scan vote tabulators and alternative voting methods for the purpose of the 2022 municipal election and 2022 election plan enhancements and considerations. We'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Clause 2, third crossing naming recommendation. We'll call the vote. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Hutchison, go ahead.
I think I know how to pronounce it, but I'd like to hear somebody do it. Does anybody know? It looks like Wabad to me, but.
Ms. Campbell, can you share with us the proper pronunciation of the new name of the third crossing?
Absolutely, and through you, your worship, I'd be happy to do that. The name is the Waban Crossing, Waban. So it's a longer A sound. Thank you.
Waban Crossing. Okay. Any further discussion on clause 2? Councillor Doherty.
I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank everybody involved in this. I think Waban is a great name for the third crossing that we can all be very proud of. And thank you everybody involved in this.
Councillor Bohm.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Just so it's on the record, I'm wondering if staff would be able to comment on the actual meaning of the name, because I know it has multiple meanings depending on which Indigenous language is reflected in it. And if staff could provide some clarity on that, I think it would inform the public on why this is such a great name for the crossing.
Ms. Campbell.
Thank you, and through you, and thank you for the question. So the name has a couple of different meanings, as you noted. The name was brought forward in Anishinaabe-Moan, which is Ojibwe. And the name tends to refer to the eastern direction, and particularly to the morning light. But more so, the name was also selected by community because it really does represent and recognize the transition of night to day. It was most beautifully sort of explained to me as this moment where anything is possible as night sort of slips into a new morning, and the opportunities that are provided in that moment of transition. So sort of an easterly direction towards the morning sun, but really calling to that moment where day and night sort of intersect and both exist.
Thank you for that comment. Yeah, the fact that it brings new hope and a new dawn, and the sun, rises in the east, and everything is not lost on the fact that this bridge will unify an entire city and hopefully be a symbol of hope for all the things we can accomplish together moving forward. So I'm excited for the new bridge to open and the new name as well. Thank you.
Councillor Neal.
Thank you very much. And I totally support this naming, and I appreciate all the work that went into it. But I keep thinking this is Kingston, and we still have the traffic circle, and we still have Market Square. And this probably will be, for a lot of people, always be called the third crossing. But I think it's incumbent upon us to try to embrace the new name and make that the new name I was about to do it, for the third crossing. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other discussion, we'll call the vote then on clause 2. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, clause 3, capital lease financing policy and agreements. We'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Clause 4, managed forests on city properties for carbon sequestration. Councillor Stroud.
Okay. I think I'll need to ask a couple of questions from staff about, first of all, the very modest seeming cost for the managed forest on the rural municipal lands. So maybe if a member of staff could tell us about the cost, a little bit more about the cost, but specifically maybe if possible, the total cost, and then what cost recovery we've already identified, even if it's not 100% approved, like where the money's likely to come from and how much we would need to find somewhere else.
Mr. McClatchy.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So when we spoke to the various potential partnering organizations that are very familiar with tree planting on a large scale like this, they advised us that plantings are going to be between $1 and $3 per seedling. So for 40,000 some odd seedlings that these lands could accommodate, that could add up to a sizable amount of money. But they also said that they do have very good access to funding programs like the 2 billion trees and the 50 million trees programs and private sponsorships. And what we're hearing is some fairly optimistic and confident estimates from these potential partners that we could be down into the 10, 20, 30 cents per seedling range for these large plantings. So that's, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 worth of work to accomplish what we would like to do on the 3 potential properties. So that's a significant level of subsidy to the city.
Thank you. And just to clarify further, the labor involved with the seedlings, like this, who would plant the seedlings, and is that labor cost paid already? Like, is it city employees, or how does that work?
It would be different for different partners that might participate in these, but generally speaking, the partners provide the contractor labor as part of that cost. So the partners, whether they be CRCA or Ontario Woodlot Association or Trees Canada, they're all well versed in accessing grant funding from the larger funding programs. And also well versed in acquiring qualified contractors to do the work. So it would not be city employees doing the planting, but city employees could participate in some of the site preparation and longer term monitoring tasks.
Okay, great. So just to recap, I'm just referring to some notes here on my phone. So the problem I had with the recommendation isn't in its intent or what it's trying to do. It's with where the money, the money that we do have to come up with, where it's going to come from. The recommendation is that it come from the tree replacement reserve fund. So I don't think I need to ask this question. I think we all know the tree replacement reserve fund is funded from monies collected from developers when trees are removed, right? So they have to pay a fee to remove trees. It's collected in this fund. And it was always my understanding that that money would pay for replacement trees. Now, for those replacement trees to be of any value to the neighborhoods where they were removed for development, it would need to be on the boulevard of these residential neighborhoods, the way that we plant trees in the city, on the boulevards today, which, as we know, is not 10, 20, 30 cents a tree, or even $1 to $3 a tree. It's more like $100 to $300 per tree for those bigger trees, those street trees. So we're talking about the 10 to 15 foot tall trees that come on the back of a truck with the root bag, right? And Public Works put them in the giant holes on the boulevard, right? And it's like an instant tree. That there's many reasons, we've talked about this as a EITP, why we use that system. And for survival, they have to start at a certain size. We're not talking about the little seedlings like we're talking about planting on this woodlot. So it's a completely different kind of planting. However, it's much more expensive. So the tree reserve fund, the money collected from the developers, if we use that money for something else, such as this woodlot planting, there's less going into street plantings. It doesn't sound like it's a huge amount of money, and maybe it may be somewhat moot where it comes from. But I really think on principle that the money we collect for replacement trees should stay in the boulevard planting program, which is not what we're talking about tonight. So I've got an amendment to that effect. I've already sent it to the clerk. I don't know if I'm ready to put it up on the screen, but basically ask that it come out of the working fund reserve instead.
Okay, so I'll just pause your time, Councillor Stroud. So we have a motion to amend moved by Councillor Stroud, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. The report 32, clause 4 from the CAO be amended in the second paragraph by adding thereto as amended to fund the initiative from the working fund reserve rather than the tree replacement reserve fund, and further amended by adding the following paragraph thereto. The report to Environment, Infrastructure, and Transportation Policies Committee include all other possible funding sources and recommendations on necessary changes to bylaws so that the funds raised from developers removing trees in urban residential areas be used exclusively in urban residential areas. So, Councillor Stroud, you have the floor. I'll restart your time to speak to the motion to amend. I know you've already sort of spoken to it, but if there's anything else you want to wish to add, and then we'll open up the floor to others.
Sure, it's really not that complex. And again, it's not about the amount of money. The amount of money we're talking about, maybe $25,000, maybe $50,000 for this woodlot, this managed woodlot on land we already own, would only pay for a few dozen trees in the other program, right? So it's not a lot of money either way. But on principle, I'm just afraid it's going to start a precedent where we look to the tree reserve fund for other climate change initiatives. This is a climate change initiative that's important and it's cheap and we ought to do it, but we don't have to pay for it out of the tree replacement fund. That's what the point of the amendment is. So maybe before we vote, though, we'll go to staff just to clarify what kind of cost range are we talking about as a cost to the working reserve?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, based on our preliminary estimates, we're thinking somewhere between $40,000 to $60,000 to complete these three projects.
And okay, yeah. So that's it. It's on principle, not more than the amount. It won't bankrupt the fund either way. But it's a climate initiative that we need to do, but I think we need to keep it separate from the tree replacement because that is the beauty of the neighborhoods. That is the health of street trees. the health benefits of street trees. Like we all have heard from Ms. Hostin and Ms. Farrar, the benefits of trees in neighborhoods. There's a tree deficit in many areas of the city. Many districts, I'm sure every district has areas where the street trees are missing, right? We're way behind on those replacements that we certainly haven't filled up every spot on every boulevard in every district. So until we do that, we ought to be maybe increasing the speed in which we plant replacement trees on the boulevard using the tree replacement fund. This is separate from tonight's recommendation, and fund this important climate change initiative from a separate stream. Again, this is important climate action work. A managed tree lot on land we already own is extremely cost-effective way to sequester carbon. I'm fully in support of the original recommendation. It's just, where does the money come from? I think it's unfair to the neighborhoods that need trees, that are in a tree deficit, to take that money away from the fund that is meant for them and then collected on behalf of those neighborhoods. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this is on the amendment only. So it's only respect to how this is being funded. Councillor Neal.
Thank you very much. And I totally support the amendment. I know it was 3.5 years ago, but one of the priorities that we came up with for this term was to address the climate crisis. And so for that reason, I think the project itself, as proposed, is really, really solidly should be supported. The issue that I have, I share with Councillor Stroud, is that the tree fund is created by neighborhoods that have lost trees because of development, and the money the developers paid to chop down and clear cut some treed lots is in this fund. And it has always been my understanding, when this has come up at planning, is that this fund is to help replace, in that specific neighborhood, those trees that were cut. And Councillor Stroud's absolutely right. $50,000 isn't an enormous amount of money. But the reality is that that money was raised with an expectation from the neighborhoods where there was clear cutting or massive tree removal. So to borrow that money for a project well away from that neighborhood, I think is awkward, to say the least. So I think this is a really, really good amendment, and I totally support it. And we may want to ask the city treasurer, but we have a substantial amount of money in our working reserve fund, as I understand it. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Clerk, can I see you for a moment? Okay, next on my list is Councillor Hutchison. To the amendment only.
So I find myself supportive of this amendment. I guess the question is, what's the other side of the equation? Like, when we need money for these seedlings, I'd like to know from staff, where are we going to get that money? I think it's clear that we need both, right? And I don't know about other councillors, but I'm getting a lot of pressure about trees. So I don't find it that funny, but it could be funny. So I would like to know from from the environment engineer or from CEO, how we will deal with this in terms of budget.
Commissioner Hugo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. So Councillor Hutchison, I believe the staff recommendation is to use the tree replacement reserve fund to do that. The amendment on the floor, I believe, advises staff to use a working fund reserve. So if that is passed, then staff would use a working fund reserve to set up this, set up the managed forest, bring back the information to EITP, source the additional funds and subsidies that Mr. McClatchy did talk about. And there is a projected some small scale operating costs in the future to manage the forest, and those will be built into future budgets. But the major cost would be what is up front, which Mr. McClatchy said would be between $40,000 and $60,000 estimated, and that would be funded from the working fund reserve should the proposed amendment be passed.
Well, it sounds to me that the money is there in the working reserve, and that's not going to disturb us unduly budget-wise. That's the general conclusion I come from what you said.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So Councillor Hutchison, to respond to your question, there is obviously sufficient funds in the working fund reserve, and there are also sufficient funds in the tree reserve fund as well.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other discussion on the amendment? Okay, we will call the vote on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. So now back to the recommendation as amended. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Kiley?
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. And through you, I wanted to briefly reference a paragraph that I thought was rather consequential from the report and ask staff, perhaps Mr. McClatchy, to comment on it. And it says this, I'm just going to read it very quickly. When sequestered carbon is converted to its equivalent in atmospheric carbon dioxide, each new hectare of a mature forest can therefore be expected to provide a net removal of approximately 8.8 total carbon dioxide per hectare per year. So I just want to make sure that I'm reading that correctly to start. That's total carbon dioxide, not tons of carbon dioxide. 8.8.
Mr. McClatchy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. That's 8.8 tons of atmospheric carbon dioxide per year per hectare for a mature forest.
Okay, perfect. And that's actually intro to my supplemental about how do we define mature forest in the context of Kingston? And I'm thinking of this just to be transparent when we're talking about planning decisions and removal of trees for development.
Yeah, so that's going to vary with which arborist you speak to, but it's going to be at least 15 years.
Okay, so you can put it into like a yearly equivalent. And is this number, because again, in the report, it's referencing the information from Environment Canada. Is this a number that we can use in other contexts, or is it specifically for the managed forest in this report?
It is for the managed forest in this report, but it is also the number that's used in our community greenhouse gas emission inventory work. So it's a very general number that is suitable for that sort of high level, broad scale work. Of course, if you wanted to find out the carbon impact from a specific forest on a specific property, then you could certainly dig deeper and look into different types of species and age and health and so forth and come up with a more accurate number. And I think also that, in terms of going forward, I believe the Climate Leadership Division is bringing forward a climate lens tool that we can apply to planning decisions and so forth that will provide additional information on this subject.
Absolutely. Thanks. This is a good baseline and we look forward to that additional information. Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else that wishes to speak on clause 4? Okay, we'll call the vote on clause as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, it is 9:06. So propose we take a 10-minute recess and we will reconvene at 9:16 to finish report 32. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is 9:16. So we will reconvene. I'll ask councillors to take their places, please. Thank you. Okay, so at this point, we are on clause 5 of report number 32, integrated care hub next steps. Any comments or discussion on clause 5? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. The ICH model we have today came about in a moment of crisis. When COVID hit, agencies serving homeless individuals and people suffering from addiction, they came together to respond to the critical needs in our community. They were developed as a wraparound model that met people where they were. Many of them were homeless, and they still needed to have opportunities to isolate, but also to be safe. Supplemental to this report, Council received the third-party evaluation, which included feedback on impacts to the neighborhood. The first delegation spoke to the need of having a community-based governance model because she stressed that it's important that stakeholders, including staff, managers, clients, as well as neighbors, have opportunities to improve the model that has been developed to date and find solutions to some of the challenges that we read in the reports and that we've heard from neighbors as well. So keeping all of that in mind, I've prepared an amendment to the report that I've already submitted to the clerk's department. I wonder if you could put it up on the screens.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Doherty. So I'll just pause your time there. So we have a motion to amend, moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Neal. The report number 32, clause 5 from the CAO be amended by adding the following paragraph thereto. The city staff work with partner agencies to implement a community impact or community-based governance model for the integrated care hub. Councillor Doherty, you've already spoken a little bit to the motivation behind it, but you have the floor if there's anything else that you want to add.
Can I reserve that time for after other councillors had a chance?
You can. So you, as the mover of the motion, you can speak first and last. So if there's anything you want to stay off the bat, but you will have last right to speak.
Excellent. Thanks. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. First up is Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Yeah, I think this is a great idea. Ultimately, I don't think anybody's really against the great work that's done there. I think part of the concern is the community and the fact that there's a lot of members right now that have some valid concerns and are experiencing, different levels of distress and different experiences there. And they feel like they don't really have a voice right now, or if they do have a voice, it's not necessarily being heard as loud and as clear as they would like. So something like this, I feel, can actually help to bring forth ideas on how to solve some of the issues and could lead to brainstorming on better ways to implement programs there, and also create more assistance for the very members of the community that this place is designed to serve. And so ultimately, I don't see any negatives with this approach. So hopefully this is something that passes, and it's a very common sense approach. And I'm actually shocked that none of us thought of it earlier in the grand scheme of things. So well done on bringing this forward.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else on the motion to amend? Okay, Councillor Doherty, you have the last word if there's anything you want to say.
Well, I really appreciated Councillor Boehm's words, so I think I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, we will call the vote then on the motion to amend. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we're back now to the recommendation as amended. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Hutchison.
We're the third party review.
No, this is clause 5.
That's fine. I want
The third party review is clause 6. So there are two clauses.
Right. Okay.
In report 32 with respect to the ICH. The third party review is the next one.
Okay. Okay, can you guys go on, because I want to look up the addeds. I've got them here. I didn't.
Okay, so I'll just quickly ask, is there anybody else that wishes to speak to clause 5? Councillor Holland? Deputy Mayor Holland?
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Yeah, just a question for staff on the first clause. The additional $500,000 for housing and homelessness services. I'm just wondering if it seems as though that's emergency housing. The question is that for emergency housing support within the hub, and if the as was mentioned by Mr. I'm sorry, I think it's Gillette, sorry, in his presentation, that that more funding is needed to support housing in general for this population, and so what those longer term amounts or projects might be.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. So Deputy Mayor Holland, the funding that is identified in terms of the city contribution would be focused on the more of the shelter homeless component of the ICH. So we've talked or heard a lot about the healthcare aspect of the ICH, but we also recognize that a number of individuals that do utilize the ICH are homeless. And in the absence of the ICH being open 24 hours a day and providing that shelter component, those individuals would migrate to our shelter system anyway. So we would be in some ways providing that service. So it does make sense to support the ICH so they can remain on site and be in a safe environment. As far as the budget moving forward, I can tell you that the budget that we have currently is we've based ourselves in the last years of operations to identify the $3 million. Could that change over time? I'm sure it could if the model was to change, but I think that's something that we would need to review with the partners and also with the Ministry of Health.
Great, thanks. That's helpful. But I guess just one last bit on the addressing the potential housing need in the longer term was really what I was sort of getting at, because I know we're doing this work shelter-wise, shelter-oriented, but the type of housing, the affordable and supportive housing work that I know our housing and social services staff have been involved in developing those projects. If you could just maybe give us a sense of how we might be serving this population in the future with those projects.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. So we've had a number of discussions in the past, I'm going to say year or 2 years at council in terms of the housing needs of our vulnerable population. We know that individuals may have struggled to move from shelter environment into completely independent living. So we've been talking a lot to council about transitional supportive housing. And you'll recall that council did approve funding for 113 Lower Union, which has now been opened and is supporting the Indigenous community in terms of transitional housing. And we are currently working on making units available at 805 Ridley, which again, council supported, and that will be focused primarily on women and women with children. So we're really trying to address this gap in the community for transitional supportive housing, which is really the next step that individuals will need.
Thank you. I'll just add to that. I mean, it seems like this could be very well timed in terms of having the new model also sort of working together or fitting in, having the population that's being served currently at the ICH and this funding, this $500,000, supporting that population in the shorter term. And then, obviously these newer units coming available eventually. So I'm hoping that that's what we see, because of course, I think as a lot of people have noted already, the ICH is doing a really amazing job on the very acute and devastating problem of drug poisoning and supporting vulnerable people in the community. But we need to be able to ensure that we have longer term options to provide for that population as well. Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else on clause 5? Councillor Hutchison.
Okay, so I think part of the confusion, not only by me, but a couple other councillors. Was that we're talking about the money before we're talking about the review. They're not necessarily have to follow they don't have to follow each other. So that beyond that, the third-party review reflects on the next steps directly. That is partly what it was aimed to do. And what we've heard from the health providers and is in the report, the next steps report, is that the health providers will be devising or are devising right now a different operational model. So we'll have to wait to see exactly what that is, but hopefully it's involves improvements for all parties. So I think the situation is that it really depends on how we're going to deal with the third-party review as far as the residents in that area and indeed the homeless. How everybody involved. You read that report, which only came out late yesterday afternoon. So in general, I'm in favor of the extension of the funding from the city for the resting place and so on, principally because we don't have any alternatives. And we still have homeless people on the streets, and the ICH is doing its work with the addictions and all the other programs that they are attempting to fulfill. So in terms of the Intercare Hub, the next steps, this item that we're dealing with here, I think that we have to put in, I'll have other questions to do with the third-party evaluation because the two are inextricably connected. So that's what I'll say for now, and I'll go from there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak to clause 5? Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. When this comes to a vote, I would like to just separate the first clause. With the contribution from the province, it's substantial. And I really had viewed that announcement as an opportunity for the city to back away from this commitment because it'll become an ongoing operational expense. And I think that I would prefer to see a rather stable, structured organization that has greater accountability before contributing more funds from the municipality.
Okay, so we will do 2 votes. Councillor Doherty, you've already spoken to clause 5. Councillor Stanek.
Thank you, Your Worship. With what Councillor Chappelle just said, I just have a question then to staff. And the question is, it was my understanding that in order for the healthcare providers that are now going to be running the integrated care hub, in order for them to get their $2.3 million of healthcare funding, that it was dependent on an additional contribution from the city, which we picked to be the 500,000. So is that true? Thank you.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So Councillor Osanik, to respond to your question, all of the conversations that we had with the Ministry of Health were clear that they were looking for not just the city, but the community to be providing a contribution to this service as well. They never intended to cover the entire cost of operation for the ICH. So the community contribution was established at 700,000, of which the city would be contributing 500 and United Way $200,000 per year.
Thank you. And with that, I will support this motion.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Bone.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I do share some of the, I guess, thoughts that Councillor Chappelle has on this, such as it's great to see that level of funding come in, but where does it go in the future? And is this one time? Are we going to get additional funding and something? I also find it interesting when any whether other level of government, whether provincial or federal, asks the community to provide funding for something that rightfully falls under their jurisdiction, simply due to the fact that communities provide all funding through our taxpayers' dollars. So I mean, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal, it is the community that's always providing the funding. So when they go back and ask for more, I sometimes struggle with that. So I do share Councillor Chappelle's concerns. So I guess my question to staff would be, the province has added some money at this point. Is it viable that if that money were to just disappear, we wouldn't be able to afford to run this as a city? Is that accurate?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I think if the city decided not to make a contribution, I'm not sure how the ICH would be able to continue to operate based on their current operational model. My guess is they would probably need to cut services substantially to make the operations and the budget work. And I'm assuming the first cut would be overnight service, which I do want to remind council that if overnight service was reduced, individuals would be looking to our existing shelter or warming center, which would put pressure on the city anyways to find spaces overnight.
I appreciate that. And I feel like most people right now probably feel, which is we're caught between a rock and a hard place. So it feels ever again like the same theme of, all my terms on council, 8 years now of just downloading responsibility onto the city. And it puts us in a position where we can't really say no because the problem exists and is right in front of us. And I believe most of us, if not all of us, truly want to help. But it also comes down to the fiscal responsibility of what can we actually afford, and can we sustain this level of spending? I mean, ultimately, once we create this resource within the community, which is already there, if the province just walks away and doesn't give any more money, there will be an expectation from the community that the city continues this. So, I mean, we are putting ourselves, the precedent has been set. It now comes down to how it gets funded and where that comes from. So I guess my next question would be, what commitments do we have from other levels of government going forward that they're going to continue to provide some level of funding so that this doesn't just become just one more thing that in the end, after, here's a couple extra million here, a couple extra million there, maybe, a couple nice announcements, but in the end is 6 or 7 years from now, is this just going to fall on the city? What commitments do we have for that? Or is that just an unknown at this point?
Well, I'll start, and CEO Hurdle may want to add something, but Councillor Bohm, the commitment from the province was for a pilot, so a 2-year pilot to continue the operations and to see from there. So unless CEO Hurdle has any other additional info, and it really is unknown after that 2-year period.
I guess just a quick follow-up. I guess therein myself and maybe some others lies the rub, is that when we do this pilot, we are the precedent setting, which could be great, but at the same time, has there been any conversations or indication from them of what they would consider successful to continue funding this pilot after those 2 years?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor Bohm, that's a very good question, and there is no doubt that the Ministry of Health will establish some measurables and deliverables as part of this funding. We haven't seen those yet because the announcement just came out, and we were able to bring this report to council in time before the closure of the ICH. But I anticipate that we will see those measurables, which they will be provided to the healthcare agencies that will be receiving the funding. I anticipate we'll see that in the next month or two.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that information.
Anybody else on clause 5? Okay, we will call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries by a vote of 12-1. Councillor Chappelle opposed. Oh, thank you. So that was, right, we're doing two separate votes. It was on the first clause. Okay, so that was on the first clause only. That carries by a vote of 12-1. So now on the remaining clauses, all those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to clause 6, report 32. This is integrated care hub third-party evaluation. Councillor Hutchison.
First, let me reference the staff report on the previous item, which indicates quite clearly that the integrated care hub is being successful as far as you can be in this, in many ways. And that's demonstrated in that report and the statistics that are in there. This report was part of the third-party evaluation to look at the operation of the ICH. The report indicates that it's doing good work. And so that is not a matter of controversy, I don't think. The question comes with the second part of that motion, which was to look at the collateral impacts on the surrounding neighborhood in the area around that, and what was happening and the effect on services and so on. So it's the one thing that it comes out and says that is very clear is that the concerns of the neighborhood, of the residents in that neighborhood, are legitimate. It is not NIMBYism, it says that. And it is that the residents have identified the situation correctly. And for the most part, I mean, there's always ifs and buts and so on. But the author of the Dr. Moulton makes that very clear, that it's not NIMBYism. These are about actual effects and that are actually going on, and that their concerns are legitimate. So I just want to make that publicly clear, because possibly not everybody's had a chance to read I think it's a 30-page report. So and at the same time, it praises the ICH. That mirrors, as far as I'm concerned, much of what I've said before. I support the functions of the ICH, not necessarily the location. She says the location has to stay, and because we don't have any alternatives at the moment, although that's been looked at by the health providers as we speak. So I was heartened to hear that the health providers are open to a community advisory board made up of not only employees and clients, but also residents of the neighborhood. That will not necessarily be smooth sailing, but it at least opens the door for that consultation, because the residents in the area not only were voicing their concerns, they came up with a number of positive and constructive suggestions about how the ICH could run better. They've said from a long time that it was too small, that it was being asked to do too much in one place. And that comes out in the report too. It's very difficult what they're trying to achieve there. And I remain kind of a little dubious about whether some of the functions should be in that specific place, that it concentrates people like clients together that have different interests and different needs. I know we're trying to do one-stop shopping here, but one-stop shopping sometimes is too complex when you get right down to delivery. So what I would like to know is there are a number of recommendations as starters. As staff, I just want to say staff has done some yeoman work in consultation with the residents and myself over the last 2 years. Okay, let's be clear about that. And for instance, the safety fences that went on behind the houses on both Montreal and Reeder Street to try and stop trespassing and theft and so on. And that was done, and that was initiated by senior staff. So, and so thank you for that. What I want to ask here is there are recommendations in the third-party review about next steps and
30 seconds.
what we can do. And I want to ask staff if we're going to follow up on that. That's my first question.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So Councillor Hutchison, the answer is yes, we will be following up on that. We did obviously just recently receive the final report, and we've just shared it as well with our community partners. We will need obviously our community partners to join us and work on these recommendations with us because they are going to be frontline service providers with a number of these recommendations. But yes, we can definitely follow up and we could provide an update to council on a quarterly basis if council would like to see what the progress is on those recommendations.
Sorry, Councillor Hutchison, I'm just going to ask you to re-ask that question just so that, excuse me, so everyone online can hear it.
Yep, I'm sorry about that. Will the city be following up with the health providers about the community advisory board?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I believe that the amendment was brought by Councillor Dorothy and endorsed by council. So yes, it is a direction to city staff, and we will be following up with the partners. Again, we will need the collaboration of our partners to implement this because we can't obviously have this model if the city is working alone on this. But I am confident, based on the feedback we've received from our community partners, that we will be able to move this forward.
Thank you. I just want to make one observation that came from the addiction services that really struck me the last time we heard about this. We were asked how many detox beds we have. We have 23. How many do you need? The person with long experience said we need 46. Okay. So I just want the public and council to know we have to have that. We have to have a road to transitional housing, which we completely have a completely not enough. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else on clause 6? Okay, we'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried by a vote of 12-1. I think Councillor Osterhoff is frozen. So if I got his vote wrong, then he can let us know. Okay, so we have no other clauses under report 36, or sorry, 32 rather. We'll move to report 33 from Planning Committee.
Moved by Councillor Kiley, seconded by Councillor Hill, that report 33 from the Planning Committee be received and adopted.
Okay, there are 3 clauses. Would anyone like any of the clauses separated? If not, then we will vote on them as a whole. Clause 1, approval of application for zoning bylaw amendment, 576 to 600 Princess Street and 465 Albert Street. Clause 2, approval of application for zoning bylaw amendment, 1400 Bath Road and 527 Centennial Drive. Clause 3, approval of application for zoning bylaw amendment, 595 Bagot Street and 38 Charles Street. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, report number 34 from the Administrative Policies Committee.
Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Bohm, that report 34 from the Administrative Policies Committee be received and adopted.
Okay, there are 3 clauses. Would anyone like any of them separated? Councillor Chappelle?
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually would like to put forward a deferral.
Well, okay, so on which clause? So we're just separating them in.
Okay, so basically, should I read my deferral? Then you'll understand.
Okay. So
I'm going to be separating into 2.
Okay, so I'm just going to back you up. So we have 3 clauses on this report. You want to deal with clause number 2?
Separating clause 2.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So first we're going to separate clause 2. Are there any other separations? Okay. So first I'm going to call the vote then on clause 1 and 3 of the report. So clause 1, use of corporate resources for election purposes policy. And clause 3, 2022 tax ratios and tax capping parameters. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, so now clause 2, board committee nominations process and equity, diversity, inclusion. Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just so excited to put forward. Effectively, what I want to share with everyone is I'm going to be putting forward a deferral, and the clerk has a copy of that deferral. And thankfully, it's seconded by Councillor Stroud, a longtime member of the nominations committee. Effectively, this deferral is to remove paragraphs, the first and second paragraphs of the report 34, clause 2. And the reason why I'm putting forward this deferral is we have, I'll just stand up for a second. And the nominations committee gets binders of applications. And the nominations committee certainly was very appreciative of the vote that was passed in December of looking at a SWOT analysis as to how to improve the nominations process. And the reason that was so well accepted is because we don't have resources, and sometimes we get support with letters from various committees, or we get support from the chairs of various committees as to the type of applicant that needs to help fulfill the mandate of that specific committee. You know, someone that may have accounting experience, or someone has a union experience for good interpersonal relationship skills as a union steward, or something along that line. And so we have all of these people who've applied year after year, and many of them have not been successful in being selected. And in part, that's because of the process that's currently underway in people selecting their first, second, and third choice. And it creates an anomaly, but there's a pressure in that. But the current committee members, I must say, I applaud their embracement even before we had a manager of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And we've spent a great deal of time, and certainly members of the committee can speak to this, of trying to provide a very focused approach to having diversity of sex, sexual orientation, as well as the opportunity to have people of diverse backgrounds and more representative of our community. So one of the issues that I brought up as a concern is the aspect that we had feedback from the community based on a website, people who may have never applied or thought of applying to a committee with the city have provided comments. However, the hundreds of people who have previously, put their names forward, they had not been contacted. And I think that would be your greatest resource, to find out what barriers they face, whether they're systemic or whether they're just the nature of how they applied, to have that feedback. And then basically, with that information, bring it back to the nominations committee to have a greater conversation as to how the nomination process would work, and improve it. And I certainly look forward to having EDI members as a strong resource for us to share that lived experience that certainly I may not have experience with, to encourage that diversity onto our committee. But I think it's really unfortunate that the Administrative Policies Committee has not had, the Nominations Committee has not had an opportunity to discuss this in a robust way. And as far as time, the reason I put Q3 is because this committee will likely not meet unless it needed to until November. So we have plenty of time for us to have multiple meetings in between to address this concern. And improve upon the excellent work that the clerk has brought forward. I mean, the research the clerk's office has done on this is outstanding, and I would just like to have a more robust conversation. That's really the premise behind this deferral.
Okay, so we have a motion to defer, moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Stroud. The first and second paragraphs of report 34, clause 2, received from the Administrative Policies Committee be deferred. So staff can reach out to prior unsuccessful applicants to various city committees and boards and consult with the Nominations Advisory Committee regarding potential changes to the nomination process before reporting back to council in Q3 2022. So the motion to defer is on the floor. Remember that you have up to 1 minute to speak, and that is to time, place, or purpose. Deputy Mayor Holland.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Quick question on time to staff. So with this delay, so one of the original motions that prompted this report that's covered in the committee report was the one on the FCM guiding principles. And there was rationale at that time that that work be done prior to the next municipal election to ensure that.
Point of order. So Deputy Mayor, I'm just going to jump in on that one. So this is just a deferral of the first two clauses.
Okay.
So that is in reference to the third clause that's not subject to the deferral.
Okay, great. Okay, just give me one more second to pull this up. Okay, good. Okay. So I do want to speak to time still on the deferral, in that I think it is okay for the most part, given that the EDI committee is currently doing the work of using the equity lens that is sort of part of what is in this proposal. So, and they're doing great work. So I can support the amendment or the deferral.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Worship. Can I just get that back on there? Because I thought that it said that they were to recontact every, can reach out to prior unsuccessful applicants. Is that, maybe this is a question to the mover. Is that all prior unsuccessful candidates?
So I'm going to jump in on here because it's the wording that's important. So regardless of what Councillor Chappelle wanted, I'll just, the interpretation that I see is not to reach out to all, but to reach out to some. Was that your intention, Councillor Chappelle? Right. So I don't think the motion necessarily directs staff that they have to reach out to everybody.
And that's the reason I asked that, was because that seems like a pretty onerous task. Thank you.
Anybody else on the motion to defer? Councillor Strutt?
Yeah, just the time. So, so I think it's important that we acknowledge that the nominations committee doesn't have any work in front of it before the time suggested in this referral. In other words, we have the time to gather more information as the deferral suggests, and we have before we need the nominations committee to make new suggestions, which won't be probably until December of this year when the new term starts and the new committees have to be populated. So I think the timing is correct, and I also think that it will further inform the decision, the eventual decision of how to reform the nominations committee, and I don't think that needs to be rushed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Through you, just could we clarify from Councillor Hill's question, who will be reached out to then? If not all, if it's a selection, how do we know who it is and so forth?
In review of the last 3 years of candidates that applied, the vast majority of people who've applied are repeat applicants. And so those would be, I would say the priority would just simply be this most recent year. I think it would be a good catch sample of those applicants who would have expressed interest, already vested in committing an opportunity, or participating in an opportunity to serve the community. And they would have the best value as to what barriers they may have to overcome in order to be part of the city committees.
Yeah, thank you. I've served with you on the committee for 3 years, and I think that makes perfect sense. And thank you.
Councillor McLaren.
I'm still not entirely clear exactly what you're looking for in this deferral. It sounds like you're asking why they didn't get on. I think you would ask the committee that.
Okay. Councillor Chappelle, you can answer the question.
And thank you, Mr. McLaren, Councillor McLaren. You could ask the way that the committee works is.
I know how it works. I've been on it.
Okay. So questions are through the chair. Thank you. Councillor Chappelle, you can respond to the question.
Well, I do appreciate the question from you, Councillor McLaren, because you didn't like some of the choices and created quite a stir. So what I want to support is the committee having an opportunity to improve and reflect on how we have greater diversity onto our committees, to our so successful applicants. You know, at this moment, it's complicated. It's a cumbersome process. And I think there's been a lot of work done by staff on the SWOT analysis. And I think we didn't have an opportunity as a committee to sit and look at how to address these concerns. So by reaching out to those who didn't or were not successful in being appointed, we'll also be able to solicit, you know, extra input on what would help them become successful. So that's really the premise behind this. And you're welcome to sit in on those committees when we have those meetings.
Anybody else on the motion to defer? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried by a vote of 12 to 1. Councillor McLaren opposed. Okay, moving on to report number 35 from the Arts, Recreation, Community. Oh, I did clause 3. So we did a vote on clause 1 and clause 3 before we did clause 2. Would you like us to do another vote on clause 3? Sorry, paragraph 3. Sorry, thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so that was, so clause 1 and clause 2 are deferred. So now we just have clause 3 under clause 2. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Good, thank you. Report number 35 from the Arts, Recreation, Community Policies Committee.
Moved by Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that report number 35 from the Arts, Recreation, and Community Policies Committee be received and adopted.
Okay, there's just the one clause. Report received from the Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee. Councillor Neal.
Just a quick question. I'm having a senior's memory moment here. Is this committee still under the Arts and Recreation?
So yes, Councillor Neal, that's why this item is under the report from the Arts, Recreation, Community Policies Committee.
Okay, but is it going to become the Housing and Homelessness? Is it going to become a direct to council?
Yes, Deputy Clerk James.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and through you to Councillor Neal. Yes, that's one of the recommendations, is that Housing and Homelessness will report directly to council rather than through Arts, Recreation, and Community Policies, but we can't do that without going through Arts, Recreation, and Community Policies first.
So I'm right, but I'm a month or two early. Thank you.
You're right, Councillor Neal. Okay, we'll call the vote on clause 1. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay. We have nothing from Committee of the Whole. Information reports, just raise your hand if you have any questions as I read through them. Number 1, 2021 Statement of Remuneration and Expenses paid to council members and other council appointees. Clause 2, Tender and contract awards subject to the established criteria for delegation of authority for the month of January 2022. Number 3, Strategic Plan Quarterly Report Q4 2021. Okay, we have no information reports from members of council. Miscellaneous business, we have a couple of motions. First, moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that notwithstanding section 3.1.4, subsection 5 of the first Capital Place Illumination Policy, council approved the application submitted by Mara Quintero, World Federation of Hemophilia, for the illumination of City Hall and Springer Market Square on April 17th, 2022 for World Hemophilia Day. Number 2, moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Deputy Mayor Holland, that as requested by John Kastnig, the Barbecue Committee, council proclaim April 2nd, 2022 as Sista Bidar Nature's Day in Kingston. We will call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, new motion number 1 has been withdrawn, so we have no other new motions. Are there any notices of motion? Okay, seeing none. Madam Deputy Clerk, I'll ask for minutes, please.
Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Hutchison, that the minutes of City Council meeting number 07-2022 held Tuesday, March 1st, 2022 be confirmed.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. There's some tabling of documents, a number of communications. Is there any other business? Okay. Madam Deputy Clerk, calls for bylaws, please.
Thank you. Before I start reading the bylaws, I just want to point out that bylaw 8 is amended based on the decisions made with respect to the citizen committee to review council remuneration and the defeat of the recommendation of the 4% base salary for members on planning committee. That was part of the bylaw that has now been removed. First bylaw vote moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that bylaws 1 through 10 be given their first and second reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
Moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that clause 12.63 of bylaw number 2021-41 be suspended for the purpose of giving bylaws 1 and 8 3 readings.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
And finally, moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that bylaws 1 through 4 and 8 through 10 be given their third reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Kiley. All those in favor? Opposed? And we're adjourned. Thanks very much, everybody.